Thank you for attending the CLE sponsored by the University of New Mexico School of Law and the Leifer Border Justice Initiative on Central American Minors Refugee and Parole Program. The Leifer Border Justice Initiative is a project sponsored by the UNM School of Law and the Jacqueline Marie Leifer Foundation. Its mission is to address the ongoing humanitarian crisis at the border. Women, children, and families fleeing political and social persecution are being subject to inhumane conditions and abuse as they seek better lives. This CLE will be recorded. Please turn off your video if you do not wish to be seen during the recording. Please keep your microphone on mute. Please type your questions in the chat for the speakers to answer as we go along or at the end of the presentation. The CLE is approved for 1 New Mexico General Continuing Legal Education credit. The link was in the Zoom invite that you received. If you are from out of state, you can request an electronic proof of attendance form for you to submit to your jurisdiction. For the proof, or if you need help with your CLE certificate, please email the Leifer Border Justice Initiative with the subject line CLE certificate. The email address will appear in the chat later on. The slides will be sent to you after this presentation. Please be advised that they are not intended to be legal advice. If you are interested in getting involved, or if you have any questions about the Leifer Border Justice Initiative, please email the Leifer Border Justice Initiative in the chat. You will find the email. So today, we would like to welcome presenters Linda Everts, Catherine Picker, and Nubia Torres. Linda Everts is a supervising attorney with the litigation department of the International Refugee Assistance Project. She was among the first attorneys to join IRAP's litigation team, which developed in 2017 in response to the Trump administration Muslim bans and other policies preventing people in need of humanitarian relocation from reaching safety and reuniting with their families. Linda was the lead attorney in IRAP's case challenging the termination of the CAM parole program, SA versus Trump, which resulted in a settlement that reopened CAM processing for 2,700 children and family members in Central America. Linda and her colleagues at IRAP have worked to ensure that families are able to benefit from the settlement by creating a hotline and producing videos and other resources for families and social services providers. Linda is a graduate of Yale Law School and Brown University, and she clerked for the Honorable Dolly M. Gee of the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. Catherine Picker is the Immigration Program Officer of the International Rescue Committee, where she helps to provide technical support and oversight of immigration legal services program for IRC's network of 27 Department of Justice recognized refugee resettlement offices around the United States. Prior to joining IRC headquarters, Immigration Technical Unit, Catherine worked for 10 years in the IRC Northern California office as a refugee resettlement caseworker and legal representative, where she was first accredited by the Department of Justice in 1996. Nubia Torres attended the University of Dallas, where she received a bachelor's degree in biology with a concentration in Spanish. She is originally from Brownsville, Texas. A first-generation American and daughter of immigrant parents, she has been working in immigration law since 2009. Ms. Torres is a fully accredited representative by the Department of Justice, which allows her to represent immigrants in the Department of Homeland Security and the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which includes immigration courts and the Board of Immigration Appeals. She is the current Region C representative for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault Board of Directors. Nubia, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope today's information will be very helpful for all of you. We will be speaking today about the Central American Minors Refugee and Parole Program, explaining what it is, who can qualify for it, and how you are able to apply for it. I know this may be something that is new for a lot of you, so I do encourage you to ask any questions you may have. We hope that you'll be able to get all of the information that you need to be able to help your clients with this. So what exactly is the Central American Minors Program? So it refers to a refugee and parole program that assists those who live in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala currently to be able to prevent them from coming as unaccompanied minors, preventing them from coming on their own and traveling through Central America and Mexico to enter the US border. If they already have a family member here in the United States that has some sort of status, and we will discuss what those statuses are, they can apply to come through the CAM program and be able to enter the United States either as a refugee or paroled in. And they have to be minors. So this program initially actually started in 2014, and by the end of 2016, there were approximately 1,500 CAM refugees and 1,500 CAM parolees in the US. Linda, anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, so, and hi everyone, it's great to be talking to you today. I'm really excited to be communicating on this subject and to hear all the questions that you folks have and to be with this amazing panel of speakers. So the Trump administration terminated the CAM program in stages. It actually it shut down the CAM parole program in secret within days of the administration taking office, and it officially terminated the CAM parole program in August of 2017. And when it did so, it stopped, it took away conditional approval status, and you're going to learn a little bit more about that later, for 2,700 people. Then later, it phased out the CAM refugee program. So it stopped accepting new applications in November of 2017, and then it stopped processing for anyone who hadn't been interviewed in January of 2018. We at IRAP, along with the law firm Arnold and Porter K. Schuler, challenged the termination of the CAM parole program specifically, and we ultimately were successful in getting a preliminary injunction that would reopen the program for 2,700 people who had been in final stages of processing and had been conditionally approved for parole. So it's a group of people who had not yet entered the United States. They were still in processing in Central America, but they were at the very end stages of processing. And some of them actually already had plane tickets or had dates when they were supposed to travel to the US when they learned that their applications had essentially been thrown out and they had nothing. And so the court ordered the government to reopen all of those cases, those 2,700 cases, and to process them to completion. And a month after we got that preliminary injunction, we entered into a settlement with the US government under which they agreed to process those 2,700 cases to completion. And so that is actually continues to be ongoing now. The reopening started in 2019, and it was expected to end about a year or so later, but because of COVID, processing has been much slower and travel has been much slower than we expected. So at this point, about 1,400 people have been able to enter the United States through the settlement, and about, I want to say, another 1,000 are in processing right now at various stages. And I'll hand this back to either Nubia or Kitty. I'm not sure who's talking about the last part.
I'm sorry, I was on mute and I was talking. The program, as Linda said, has been restarted, and it's going to be opening in 2 different stages. So the first stage is going to be cases that were reopened without an interview. So any case that had already been submitted and are waiting on that interview that never happened, that's the first group of cases that is going to be reviewed. And then secondly, we are still waiting on an application to be provided in order for us to be able to apply. So no, you cannot apply today. If anybody has said that they have applied in the previous cycle, then they will be able to go through that interview process. But if as of today, there is no application, the application has expired and we are waiting on the Department of State to release that application. Now, who actually qualifies? I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to jump in very quickly to make one tiny thing clear, which is the reopening that Nubia was just talking about. This is the restarting under the Biden administration. So it's separate from the lawsuit. So under the lawsuit, 2,700 cases that had already been filed were reopened. And now what Nubia is talking about is what happened once Biden took office. His administration announced the reopening of CAM in the 2 phases.
Thanks. So who qualifies for this? Who can actually apply? So if I am in the United States and I am the parent or legal guardian of a child, I may be able to apply if that parent or legal guardian is a citizen of El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. I am at least 18 years of age as the parent. I am presently in the United States with one of the following statuses. So I am either an LPR, which is a legal permanent resident, or a green card holder, somebody who has a residency in the United States. I have TPS, or temporary protective status, which is a status that has been granted, especially for the Central American countries, since about 20 years ago that they've had these statuses, and being able to continually have these statuses at the time, which is an 18-month relief from deportation from people who are citizens of El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. But you have to have had this status since that time. You cannot apply for it now. It's not a new thing. And if they currently do have a valid TPS, they could be able to apply for relief for their children. If they have been paroled in, so somebody who has presented themselves at a port of entry at some point in time and have been allowed to enter the United States, not with a visa, but paroled into the US, they may be able to apply. Somebody who has deferred action. The deferred action is a deferment from removal, whether that be through a U visa that is pending, whether that be through DACA, whether that be through some other benefit from deportation. If they have a deferred action, they may be able to apply for their child to enter through CAM. If they have the deferred enforcement from deportation, so certain countries have the DD, which allows them to be deferred that deportation that they have. If they currently have that as well, they may be able to apply. Withholding of removal, or the new ones that have been added at this new stage have been a pending asylum application, which means that they have already submitted an asylum application, whether that be affirmative or defensive, and have a pending asylum at the moment, a pending I-589, or a pending U visa. Somebody who has submitted a U visa before 5/15/2021, and they are waiting for that U visa to be adjudicated. Whether or not that child is included as a derivative of that U visa, they may still be able to apply through the CAM program. Now, you may notice that the date is for both asylum and for pending U visa is May 15th, 2021. What happens for applicants that submitted a U visa after that date? As you may now know, applicants who submit a U visa after the U visa is considered bona fide, they will receive deferred action, which means you're going to be applying for that benefit through the deferred action, not primarily through the U visa. So it's still included on the list. It's just included under a different category. I don't know if Catherine or Linda want to add anything. Great. So who can I actually apply for? I can apply for a qualifying child. Now remember, for immigration purposes, a qualifying child is an unmarried under 21 who currently live in El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. They are from those countries, they live in those countries, and there is possibility of an extension of this. I don't know if Linda wants to add anything, but for now, it is only for the countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras. Again, Central American minor program at the moment, that is the name of the program. So it only relates to Central American countries. It could be a stepchild or an adopted child. And I have to just show that there is the proper legal relationship. If I'm married, a spouse of someone who has a child there, and I'm able to apply for that stepchild or adopted child as well. And I can also include any other family members who care for and live with the qualifying child. So for example, if my child lives with my mother, so the child's grandmother, I may be able to apply for them to come through the CAM program as well. If they live with the other parent, or if they live with an older sibling or an aunt or uncle, somebody else who has the relationship with the child, regardless of age. So if it could be other children, regardless of age or marital status, it could be the birth parent of the qualifying child, or it could be anybody who is the caregiver of the qualifying child who is related to me or the child. Now, each one of these individual people will have to apply for refugee or parole on their own, but they may be also included in the application. So even though the child is the primary one, the family members may also come in with that. Anything you guys want to add? There's a question here. It says, do you know if the new category of pending I-589 filed before 5/15/2021 includes individuals whose application is currently on appeal to the BIA? I believe so, but I'll leave that for Linda or Catherine. But I do believe so.
I'm not positive about the answer to that question. I wonder if we could research that and get back to you after the fact.
Okay. Now, there's some important information when it comes to the Central American program that is important to remember. There is no fee for this application. So if someone is charging you for this application, they are not allowed to. And that is very specific on the instructions that there should be no fee from the Department of State or the resettlement agency helping them complete the form. Which it comes to our next step, that this has to be done through a resettlement agency. So for example, here in Dallas, we are able to, we have a resettlement program. So if a private attorney has a 589 pending or a U visa pending for a client and they want to do the CAM program, we are going to have to do that as the resettlement agency. So it cannot be done through any other means. It has to be done through a resettlement agency. How long does it take? It could take about up to a year. Normally the CAM process, according to the website, says it takes between 6 and 12 months, but because of COVID, there could be longer delays. So important to keep that in mind. And you need to complete the affidavit of relationship, or the DS form 7699, the one that I mentioned that has not currently been updated. We are waiting on the new version. And that has to be filed with the resettlement agency. And with that, I'll pass it over to Linda.
Thanks, Nubia. And on the questions that Xavier asked, I think the answer is we actually don't know yet, Xavier. I just checked the USCIS website, which everyone can see at the bottom of the slide, www.uscis.gov/CAM. So that is the most up-to-date information that we have about the CAM reopening. Unfortunately, as Nubia mentioned, we still don't have the form, the AOR form that folks will have to apply with, and that will provide the most detailed guidance about each of the categories of people who are eligible to apply. And so I think the answer is we really don't know. But I'm curious if Kitty or Nubia have a different answer to that question.
Yeah, this is Kitty. I don't have an answer. I just would note that the individual who files the CAM AOR form must continue to have whatever qualifying status they have up through the time that the CAM minor enters the U.S. So, if someone's asylum is on appeal and they lose, that would if in fact they are allowed to file a CAM AOR, which is, we don't have definitive information about that yet, but should their grant of asylum, be denied on appeal, their relative would be disqualified.
So launching into the approval process, we are going to see a more detailed rundown of what the process looks like in just a couple of slides. But for now, sort of at the most high level, when someone applies to the CAM program, every single application is first considered for refugee resettlement. So if the person meets the statutory definition of a refugee under US law, that determination is made by a USCIS officer. If the officer determines that the application does not meet that standard, then every single application is considered on a case-by-case basis for parole. And if the person if the USCIS officer decides that in an exercise of discretion, the person should be granted parole, then they're granted parole, and if not, the case is denied. So it's a multi-step decision-making process. For folks who are granted refugee resettlement, that means that they will come to the United States, they will enter as a refugee, and when they enter as a refugee, they'll receive all the benefits that any other refugee would receive. So that includes refugee resettlement assistance from a resettlement agency, and that they will be able to adjust to legal permanent resident status within 1 year of their entry. Now, if they enter as a parolee, it's a little bit different. So first and foremost, a person cannot be granted parole before they actually go to a U.S. port of entry. So that's like you fly to the United States, you show up at an airport, that is the port of entry, and an immigration official has to look at your passport and decide what to do. So that's a Customs and Border Patrol person. So basically, you show up with a letter saying that USCIS has approved you to come to the United States and you have been approved for parole for a certain period of time under the CAM program. But the CBP officer at the port of entry actually makes the final determination about whether you are granted parole. For CAM, historically, people were granted 2 years, but now it's either 2 or 3 years of parole if they're entering into the country. And that is a temporary status that only lasts for that amount of time unless a person is able to apply for some more durable status. So that's the second bullet. And we advise everyone who's entering as a CAM parolee to consult with an immigration attorney after they enter the United States to see if they might be eligible for something that would allow them to stay in the United States on a permanent basis. So for example, if they might be eligible for asylum or for special immigrant juvenile status. Oh, and thanks, that's really helpful. And so for those, in addition, if folks are not eligible for some other status, under the Biden administration, people who enter as CAM parolees can now apply for re-parole through CAM. And so that means that they can apply to extend the period of their parole for another 2 or 3 years. And there's an application to do so. And that website there, the USCIS.gov/CAM, provides detailed instructions about how to do that. And this is really important because it's not just people who are entering through CAM right now, but this also, the re-parole process actually applies to people who entered under the Obama administration, so many years ago, whose parole period has now expired. And so there are approximately at least 1,500 people who are in this country right now who came to the country as CAM parolees in the past, whose parole period has necessarily expired and who are now eligible actually to apply for CAM re-parole. And finally, if folks who are here as CAM parolees need to leave the United States for any reason during the period of their parole and they wish to re-enter the US, they need to seek advance permission to re-enter in advance. And I see that there is a question in the chat. Just take a quick look. About a motion of reordering. We're going to think about that one, actually, and I will pass the baton to Kitty in the meantime.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm going to go over kind of a very sort of, broad brush review of the process that CAM applicants go through. And then I can, talk about things in somewhat more detail if people have questions, but just to kind of give you a broad sense of how these individuals, what they have to go through to get into the United States. It all begins with the U.S. Parent, or the also known as the qualified parent, or QP. There's lots of jargon and acronyms, in refugee processing general and in the CAM program as well. Certainly don't want to confuse anybody by throwing them all at you, but, you know, in case you encounter these terms, you know, you should have some sense of what they're referring to. So the QP, or the qualified parent in the US, so that's the parent with TPS or, you know, with the pending asylum application or whatever, goes to the affiliate office of one of the 9 national refugee resettlement agencies. And these are not, you know, nonprofit organizations that have contracts with the US Department of State to administer the reception and placement program under the US Refugee Admissions Program. And I think Nubia very helpfully put a link in the chat to the list of resettlement agencies that work in the reception and placement, or the RNP program. So you have to go to an affiliate office of one of those agencies where the parent will complete the Form DS 7699 Affidavit of Relationship, or AOR, the CAM AOR. After the form is completed by the resettlement agency, it goes through various rounds of vetting. And if it's ultimately accepted by the State Department Refugee Processing Center, then the case is entered into the refugee database, and the International Organization for Migration, which is the NGO that holds the contract with the State Department to administer the CAM refugee parole program on site in Central America. IOM will contact the qualified child, the CAM minor, in either El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala, and conduct what's called a pre-screening interview, where they gather, you know, basic biographical data and collect information related to their persecution claim, and then the individual is scheduled for sample collection for DNA testing. DNA testing is a mandatory part of the program. Every claimed biological relation, so the US parent, if they're filing a CAM AOR on behalf of a biological child, those relationships have to be confirmed through DNA before the minor will be allowed to proceed to the interview with USCIS. So those tests are paid for by the Department of State. However, if the test, you know, proves that or fails to establish the biological relationship, the individual, initially the applicants had to pay for the tests up front, and they were reimbursed typically once the tests came back, you know, positive, showing, you know, confirming the claimed relationship. And those whose relationships failed to be borne out through the DNA didn't get reimbursed. Although now it's my understanding that that the State Department will be covering the cost of DNA up front. Anyway, and then, yeah, the US parent is instructed to contact a laboratory that's certified by the American Association of Blood Banks, so an AABB certified, you know, blood bank, to start the DNA collection process. They have to go through very strict, I mean, any of you who've done work in consular processing, who have had to comply, or family reunification, through I-130s, who've had to comply with USCIS or DOS DNA requests, is familiar with the really strict protocols. So, again, those have to be observed in this case too, but at least IOM is facilitating the process overseas. So after the DNA test results come back and confirm the relationship, then the case is scheduled for the interview with USCIS. There are a couple of other steps that happen as well. They have to go through security screening, background checks. All of that has to come back before the case can be interviewed by USCIS. The USCIS interview is essentially to determine if the individual meets the INA 101A42 definition of a refugee. So those of you who are familiar with asylum, that it's the same. They have to demonstrate, well-founded past persecution, well-founded fear of persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So as we know, that can be difficult for minors. In the past, the approval rates for refugee status for people applying through the CAM program had been, a lot lower than expected, partly because, they were, the way that adjudicators were interviewing these kids, it just made it more difficult for the kids to articulate persecution claims. Anyway, we'll see what happens going forward with the restart of the program. There's hopefully the issues in how these claims are being assessed and how the information is being solicited from the applicants will result, will be resolved, and we'll see higher approval rates. But in any event, individuals who failed to to be approved for refugee status on a discretionary basis were offered parole as an alternative, and Linda discussed that. So each individual child, as well as the other household members or family members included on the case, has to go through an individual adjudication. So just because a child is approved for refugee status doesn't automatically mean everybody else on the case is. They have to each establish their own individual persecution claim. Once the case is approved, for refugee status, then they go through an allocation process where they're assigned to one of the resettlement agencies for assistance in resettlement, which begins with a loan for the transportation to the U.S., reception at the airport, housing, cultural orientation, assistance in accessing medical and social services, and a whole slew of other benefits once they get here to the U.S. Unfortunately, parolees will not have the assistance of a resettlement agency. Once they get here, they're kind of on their own. They have to pay for their own transportation. Again, they don't have the benefit of being able to apply for adjustment of status after a year, et cetera. I think that's pretty much a summary of the process, and happy to share it in more detail if people have questions. I noticed there are a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe this is a good time to pause and address some of them. Okay, must an applicant continue to be under 21 when he applies for reparole, or is it only 21? No. Yeah, once you're granted parole under the CAM program, you continue to qualify for reparole, assuming that, the standards under which parole requests are being evaluated don't change like they did under the Trump administration. But there's no age out, if that answers the question. So once somebody qualifies initially for the program, there is no subsequent aging out. Okay, can a biological father not on the child's birth certificate apply if they show a bona fide DNA relationship? That's a good question. They can certainly, I would say yes. There is another step in the process that I just went over. I kind of glossed over it, but it is an important step, and that question, kind of triggered that for me. In the course of doing the security background checks, et cetera, there's another process. In fact, before they get to that step, they do something called a RAVU review. And RAVU stands for the Refugee Access Verification Unit. It's a unit within USCIS that whenever any individual files an affidavit of relationship for a relative to come through the refugee program, they go through this Refugee Access Verification Unit review, where basically their A file, the parent here in the US, their A file is subject to review for consistency in their relationship claims. So if they never previously claimed a relationship to somebody that they are subsequently file a CAM AOR on behalf of, usually that case is, that there's a request for additional evidence, and that case can be rejected, and not considered for the program. So that RAVU stage of review is really important, because it will flag any inconsistencies in an individual's prior filings with the government. Okay. Okay. Do both parents on the birth certificate have to give consent for the minor? Linda, you might be able to speak a little bit more to this. I do believe that the other parent, if they're not included on the case, does have to give consent for the minor to travel, to join the other parent in the United States.
Yeah, so this is actually as a matter of Central American law, the law of the three countries, and we have some more information about this if folks are interested. So if we go to the next slide, I could talk a little bit about where you can find that information. So this is the Minority-CAM website that IRAP developed after we had the settlement, and that was to make sure that the folks who were benefiting from the settlement knew about what was going on, like knew that their cases were going to be reopened, knew what they had to do in order to benefit, and had just the information that they needed when they were actually approved to travel to the US and once they got to the US. Because as you may have realized, sort of one of the themes of this is that parolees get a lot less handholding and resources than refugees who are coming into the United States, unfortunately. And so the result is, we felt that we really needed to help as much as we possibly could to develop materials for parolees. And so this website has all of the materials that IRAP and also in working with the IRC have developed together. And so you can find, if you go to this website, you can find a bunch of different kinds of resources. So one kind is pamphlets, and there are pamphlets that are designed for parents whose cases are going to be reopened. And I should just sort of take a step back for a minute. When we developed the website and all of these resources, we were specifically thinking about the group of people who had filed in the past and whose cases were reopened as a result of the settlement. Now, 2 years later, and with the amazing news from the Biden administration that they are reopening additional cases and going to be opening the CAM program to new cases, We are starting to change these resources and develop new resources to help folks who will benefit from that reopening. So you won't find a lot of those resources yet because they're actually in development right now, and we're continuing to wait for more information from the Biden administration about exactly what the reopening for new applications will look like. So we still don't know what date the administration is going to start accepting new applications, and there's still some questions, as we alluded to earlier, about exactly who will be applying and for whom. But if you keep checking back, we will have updated resources on MNORIS-CAM soon. And I see that there's sort of a set of questions about the asylum seekers who are seeking to apply on behalf of their kids. Xavier and others have been asking about this. So the reason that we don't have more information about this right now is because that is a new category of qualified parents who are eligible for CAM. So in the past, under the Biden administration, only the first 6 categories were eligible to apply. So these are folks in the United States who are parents of kids who are in Central America. And primarily the people who were taking advantage of the program were people with temporary protected status. That was 90% of the parents, the qualified parents who were applying. The Biden administration, when it announced the reopening, announced that it would sort of broadly expand eligibility for qualifying parents in the United States. And one of the biggest category it added was people who are asylum seekers. But the issue is we only have the information right now that the Biden administration has provided in pretty general public statements. And so that's, the website I directed folks to earlier, and also some additional press releases and the like, but that's all we have. And so until we get more detailed information from the administration, and I expect to see this soon at the time that the reopening actually happens, like that the program starts accepting applications for new applicants, I expect we'll have a lot of information soon. So in the next couple of weeks or months, is my hope. And I see Kitty nodding her head, so I'm glad you have the same expectation. But so back to MNORIS-CAM. So this is a place where you can find pamphlets that are designed for parents and for kids, folks who are currently in the United States and kids who are currently in Central America whose cases are being processed. We also developed some resources for people who were approved to travel, and it tells them exactly what to pack, what to take pictures of, and what to copy before you go, and what to do as soon as you arrive. For example, very soon after your arrival, trying to speak with an immigration attorney. And then we also have resources that we developed that are geographically specific. So for parolees who are in the United States and who live in communities that have big Central American presence, so I'm thinking here, Northern California, Southern California, Texas, the Boston area, the New York City, New Jersey area, and the DC metro area. We have resources that folks can look at, pamphlets that talk about where you might be able to find free or low-cost immigration attorneys, and other kinds of resources that might be helpful. Personal charge. Yes, thank you, Taylor. So that's one kind of resource. Other resources that we have are videos, because we found that very often parents in particular were more comfortable watching a short video about what the process would look like, or problems that we were encountering in processing, as opposed to reading a pamphlet about it. And so we have a lot of videos, some that IREP developed and some that the IRC developed, and you can find links to those on the website. And then we also have information about how to find the hotline and other resources. So this hotline that's at the bottom is something that IREP founded and that is now operated by the IRC in collaboration with IREP. And so this is a place that families can call, and others can call as well, for information about processing. And there you can see there's the US number that's designed for parents to call. There's an El Salvador number that's designed for folks in Central America to call. And then there's also an email. And so previously the hotline was specifically geared for parents who were benefiting from the settlement, but I know that the hotline is now getting a lot of questions from parents about the reopening. And I just wanted to make one small thing clear, that when we talk about the reopening, so I think we've been focusing on new applications, and that's the part that hasn't started yet. But there is also a whole class of applications that were filed in the past and that have been reopened. And the reason they've been reopened is because they were never interviewed. So this is the group of people, when we were talking about how the Trump administration shut down the CAM program in phases, there was a group of people who had submitted applications, but they were not interviewed before January of 2018, and the Trump administration administratively closed all of those cases. And from what I understand, it's approximately 3,000 cases that were affected by that, but Katie probably knows better than I do.
Sorry. Yeah, no, Lindsay is the numbers person. I don't hold those numbers in my head, but yeah. And the agencies are, going through, trying to, some of these cases, because they were filed so long ago, it's become, people move and we lose contact. But, we are trying to go back and reconnect with people, updating their information. But yeah, certainly if you're aware of anyone who previously filed and their case, never proceeded, certainly get in touch with a resettlement agency and, make sure to try and restart the process. I have a couple of things I just want to mention because, this is sometimes comes, as a surprise to people, but, when someone comes through the CAM program as a refugee, so for example, the TPS parent files for their CAM child and the child's mother. The mother, if she's married to the TPS dad, and she's granted refugee status, she can file an I-730 refugee relative petition for him upon arrival. In addition, people who come through the CAM program as refugees are now eligible to file other forms of applications for family reunification on behalf of their children or their parents or their spouses, separate and apart from the CAM program. There are other modes of family reunification through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. So they should most certainly consult with the Refugee Resettlement Agency about those other mechanisms if they want to consider bringing additional members of their family to join them. One more thing popped into my mind. Oh, yeah, it hasn't been asked, but inevitably it will be. Sometimes after the fact, somebody files a CAM AOR on behalf of a child and the child subsequently enters the country, through the southern border. That disqualifies them from the program at that point. You can't apply for refugee status from within the United States. That's something.
Although one thing on that, City,
yeah,
that we've had clarified is if the child who's in the United States
goes
actually is supposed to leave for any reason, voluntarily or involuntarily, technically they're eligible. So the USCIS would consider the fact of the unlawful entry when considering whether what to do with their application.
Generous and admissibility waiver provisions there. So those are things to consider.
So I think we have some extra time to either answer more questions or to talk about, the more detailed rundown of processing.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, wait, there's stuff in the. Hold on. Let's see if I can get rid of that. Sorry. Yeah, this is sort of this is also a little more detailed, but is still vastly simplified, from what the actual process involves. But this includes some of the additional steps, like, for example, the RAVU process that has to clear before the case can be scheduled for USCIS interview. This is the other step that I referred to earlier about the USCIS continuously conducts lawful status checks on the U.S. parent to ensure that they maintain their eligibility, as somebody who, a TPS holder or whatever. Because if that parent's status changes, if they lose that status at any time before the CAM refugee or parolee arrives, then that case is disqualified. So that's important to know. And yeah, here's a long list of some of the acronyms that you might encounter. In particular, RPC, which is the State Department Refugee Processing Center, which is kind of the central administrative hub for everything related to the Refugee Resettlement Program. And then this RSC, or the Resettlement Support Center, which is facilitates the processing on the ground locally. And in different parts of the world, that RSC contract is held by different NGOs. In Central America, it's the International Organization for Migration. So you'll hear RSC or IOM, and just understand that that refers to the same entity in this context, okay? There's a question here. Does resettlement provide any outlets for kids who entered as unaccompanied children after their CAM process was canceled by Trump? Well, as Linda mentioned, the case may possibly be reopened if the child, returns to come through the process, in their home country. Otherwise, there's no special assistance through the resettlement agencies. They may be eligible for, they could certainly seek special immigrant juvenile status or asylum. I mean, there are a variety of forms of relief that they can seek independently of the CAM program. But Linda, you might be, or Nubia, you might be in a better position to speak to those.
I don't know that there's much to add on my end. I think those, we would advise folks to, or suggest that folks talk to immigration attorneys just to make sure that the immigration attorneys can really dig into the particulars of the case and see if there's any other option for a more durable status.
And I would say that for parolees as well. A lot of folks come in, they essentially fail their refugee interview and they come in with parole, but that's, they may have other avenues for relief once they're here in the US. So I would suggest that anybody who gets parole through the CAM program and wants to seek a more permanent form of relief, talk to an immigration attorney.
Are there any other questions? I'm curious actually to hear more about Michael's question. Which FOIA records in particular, Michael, do you have in mind? Of an individual or more generally about the program? And Michael's question is, do you have any advice for obtaining FOIA records about CAM?
Yes, I've requested the A file, and also specifically, this is for someone, a family that came through, entered on parole, and we were considering whether to file for asylum, and we ultimately did, but I wanted to get the records, the transcript of kind of similar to an affirmative asylum transcript, and got stonewalled. Even though I had like the letter with the RSC case number and the parole information, they claimed there were no records. So I'm now filing again, but it's been really frustrating. So that's what my question had to do with.
Yeah, everyone who applies for the refugee program completes a form I-590, which is the refugee equivalent of the I-589. So at the very least, they should have that. I mean, God knows how heavily redacted it'll be, but Just so, you know, you should be aware that if they were adjudicated by USCIS for refugee status, they had to have submitted an I-590.
Michael, I actually haven't seen this particular situation. We've FOIA'd a lot of documents related to the CAM program writ large and the shutdown, but I would love to chat with you offline about this because it sort of relates to some work that we're doing right now. So if that's possible, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
We will be sharing the presentation afterwards. So if you guys need a copy of it, you will have that.
Thank you so much for presenting today. It was a lot of information. So I'm glad that your slides will be available to the attendees. It was just really wonderful for us to get this information. So I think we are all thankful for your presentation today. Everyone, look at the chat if you need any help with your CLE or proof attendance. And thank you for attending today's presentation. It's really been wonderful. I appreciate it. Take care, everybody.